my name is Dina, and in today's video we're going to go over some of my favorite watercolors and types of watercolors that I use in my watercolor practice. I have been an artist for about 15 years, have sold my artwork and had it appear in a couple of shows, and we're just going to look at some different price points of watercolor paint and a few different types of watercolor paint that you can get. So we're going to start off by looking at traditional watercolor, and we're going to start with a very inexpensive product. So my very first watercolor set as a watercolor artist was this palette right here. This is the Artist Loft 36 color palette. It retails for $5.99, and when I bought this I used a coupon and got it for half off. So for many years, over 5 years, I had this watercolor palette, and it was my primary watercolor palette that I used for my work. It appeared in paintings that I sold and appeared in a show. So this is a pretty good value for what you get. The paint is a little chalky and dries very quickly. And I'm just going to use my favorite quill brush. This is a natural scroll quill brush from Silver. And we're just painting on a cold press watercolor paper. I'm purposely not using the highest quality. I want to show kind of practical everyday watercolor supplies. So as you can see, this isn't the most pigmented paint. The colors tend not to blend very well, but this served me pretty well. As I said, this palette is about 15 years old, and I feel like it is a great introductory palette if you know someone who wants to get into watercolor painting. So as you can see, as I said, these are not the most pigmented colors, but they do behave pretty nicely. They dry a little chalky, but not bad for $5.99. Now the next set I'm going to take a look at is going to be jumping up in price a little bit. This is the travel set that I use. It's from Derwent. It is their Incense travel set. This comes with 12 colors, a little sponge, and a water brush. So I use this regularly for plein air painting, for painting in coffee shops, and it is a very highly pigmented watercolor, not quite a traditional watercolor. Just to show you how these compare, these are definitely much more pigmented colors. They definitely move a lot more fluidly on the paper. So this is $20 to $30, so we are going up in price quite a bit from $5.99, but overall still a really nice set. These are not quite traditional watercolors. They are the Incense line, very staining, highly pigmented colors. They do blend nicely. You can kind of see, you can blend right on the paper a little bit, and you definitely get a nice, beautiful finish on your paintings with these. So this one is the Derwent Incense. Now we're going to look at a couple of things that are mixed together here. So when I first wanted to upgrade to professional watercolors, I got this Windsor and Newton Cotman travel set. This retails for between $30 and $40. It comes with 12 colors, and that's going to be, this top row is the colors that came with it. This bottom row is going to be some other tubes. This is a customizable palette from Windsor and Newton. It has all this extra space for you to fill extra half pins. So that's what I did here. So we'll talk about these later, but this top row are the Windsor and Newton Cotman travel tin set, and these are really nice buttery rich watercolors. You can see I use a lot of this yellow here, almost new gamboge color. I don't have what the actual colors are for these, what their title is. You can see compared to the other ones, they stay wet a little longer. The higher quality watercolors are definitely a lot more blendable. They stay wet for longer, even on this not great quality paper. I am just using Blick's house brand watercolor paper. And I've had this set for several years and it's lasted me quite a while. And they are very nice blendable paints. They move very nicely on the paper. They stay wet for a long time, allowing you to work. And I just feel like the blend here is a lot more even than on these other ones. These ones kind of granulate a little bit, the Derwent, where these Cotman paints, at least the ones in this set, are not granulating. I do have a few Cotman loose tubes. I did really like this paint set and found they do sell them as loose tubes. Payne's Gray is my personal favorite color to use in watercolor. It's a very versatile color, so I bought a tube of that, as well as alizarin crimson and Van Dyke brown. I think this has Van Dyke brown, but I use it a lot, so I bought a tube. The tubes, I want to say, are maybe $5–6 each, so you do get quite a value of getting the set. You can find it for like $30 to $40. Just to show you this Payne's Gray. Oof. It's kind of exploding out of the tube a little bit. As I said, this is my personal favorite color to use in painting. It's very versatile. It's kind of like a bluish gray, and it is the darkest color that I traditionally use in my painting. I don't like using the lamp black that comes with this kit. I feel like it's not as dynamic of a color as Payne's Gray has that bluish hue. Sometimes I make it more purpley blue as well. Versus, you can see I've hardly used any of this lamp black that I personally feel like is a little bit of a flat color. Not my favorite to use in paintings where I want those dark shadows. I'd much rather have those beautiful blues in the Payne's Gray. So those are the kind of budget, mid-tier, and then a little higher end. My personal favorite watercolors are from Daniel Smith. That's what most of the ones down here are. I'm going to show you my Daniel Smith tubes. So Daniel Smith is definitely going to be the highest price point. Sometimes you can find kits, sets of the tubes that come like this right here is a set of their essentials. So it's a great set for mixing pretty much the whole color wheel. And then I do have some loose tubes of Daniel Smith, both their just some regular colors and then some of these duochrome colors, which are kind of sparkly pearlescent colors. So let's take a look at the Daniel Smith. Those tend to run $6 to $15 for a tube, so they are a little pricey. If you can get one of those sets, the mixing set is their essentials kit. It's like $40 to $50. It's a pretty good value. My favorite color from Daniel Smith is probably this new Gamboge right here. It's super rich, beautiful buttery yellow. I also really like Undersea Green. This is a granulating color. So as it dries, some of the blue and yellow and the green kind of separate and give you some great effects. And really nice for foliage. I think that these watercolors are the best investment if you are wanting to get more professional colors. I do really like Daniel Smith. I find that they're highly pigmented. This aquamarine is beautiful. And I find that they just blend very nicely, similar to the Cotman, but I personally like the Daniel Smith ones a little better. I find the colors are a little deeper, richer, and then they do have, you know, some of those cool granulating colors that can kind of more spread into others. As I said, these small tubes you can usually find in sets that are pretty reasonably priced. Quinacridone Rose is one of my favorite colors, and I've had this tube for like 4 years, and I've still have all of this left, so they definitely last a long time. These bigger tubes tend to be more like $15. This carbazole violet is extremely vibrant. Very highly pigmented. I mix this one a lot with that Payne's gray to get a nice like violet-y gray that I use for shadows a lot of time in florals. The last like traditional watercolor I wanted to take a look at is I just started testing out these Blick watercolors. I actually find these pretty comparable to Daniel Smith watercolors. Both of these, the quinacridone rose and the Delft blue, are very highly pigmented and they move very nicely. I have those both in my palette as well. So just to show you this quinacridone rose, from Blick versus the one from Daniel Smith, very close in texture, color. And then this Delft blue is really highly pigmented and very nice as well. So I'm actually really happy with these Blick watercolors, and I'll probably try buying some more from Blick. So these are your traditional watercolors, very inexpensive ones, and kind of side by side. It's even hard to tell, you know, which one's which. These are our very inexpensive, our mid-tier, mid-upper tier, and then our kind of upper tier watercolors of the Daniel Smith. And it is definitely doable on a budget to use cheaper watercolors. If you have good paper, good brushes, good technique, you can make cheaper watercolors work. So I would recommend investing in paper and brushes if you're just getting started, and splurging on the paint once you feel confident in your watercolor practice. So I wanted to take a look at a couple of other supplies that I use in my watercolor. The next one is going to be watercolor pencils. So I do frequently work mixed media with watercolor pencils and get kind of those pencil stroke effects. These watercolor pencils from Artist Loft were the first ones I got. These are also $5.99 for like a 24 set or something. And while I do like the pan watercolors I showed you, I do not like these. This is something I would skip. Just to kind of show you, I feel like these are much more like drawing with a colored pencil. They're not very buttery in texture. Just to kind of show a little bit of their texture, we can definitely still see the paper very heavily through just what I drew here. And if I try to water activate this, it's all right. We definitely still see some of those pencil marks kind of deep in there. It's not perfect. They are usable, but for just a little bit more. So these were $5.99. For $10, I got what I used for the next several years for watercolor pencils. These are from a brand, Milan Aquarelle, and I am a big fan of these. If we kind of just compare drawing, they are way more buttery with less effort. I don't get as much of the paper showing through just on one pass of drawing with them. They feel a lot nicer to draw with. And then when I use my water with them, I feel like they just melt a little better. And those brush strokes or those pencil strokes brush a little better. And we definitely can use this much more like a traditional watercolor paint. Like I said, those are Milan. They're about $10 for a set of 12, so definitely worth it. Now, the nicest watercolor pencils I have, and I do really love these, are these from Faber-Castell. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. They are the Durer Artist Watercolor Pencils. These ones were a little more expensive. They were about $30 for this set of 12. And I use these very frequently. I had a painting that was even in a show that I completely did with these watercolor, and it looks like a painting versus, a colored pencil drawing. So watercolor pencils are awesome if you are new to watercolor and you want something that gives you more control, but then they're also great for adding mixed media effects. I do a lot of stuff with details and shadow with these on my paintings. And you can see how rich and vibrant the colors are. And when I add the water, it just really melts that color. It's movable and spreadable, just like if I use watercolor out of a tube, and those pencil marks like completely disappear. You can't really tell that this was done with a watercolor pencil versus just, you know, regular watercolor paint. So I am a big fan of these Faber-Castell. If you can use a coupon somewhere like a craft store, Michael's, you can probably get the price of these down. They're about $30 for this set. So last watercolor tool I want to look at is going to be not really watercolor, but related to watercolor. I was going to be comparing a couple of gouaches. Get a fresh piece of paper, and I was kind of interested in gouache. I don't really have a very cheap set. I kind of went with a mid-range as my first ones. And to be honest, these were not my favorite. This is Windsor and Newton gouache. I got this set from Michael's. I believe it retails for $20 to $30. I was able to get it for like $2 from Michael's using like stacking coupons. And I tried putting it in a palette. And it got extremely dry and cakey. I know I can probably reactivate this with water, but using it from the palette is not my favorite experience. It's very hard to get it saturated. And I'm gonna try using one just like straight from the tube just to see what it looks like. Let's go with ultramarine, straight from the tube. Squeeze a little bit of that on my brush. And I just feel like these are a little bit flatter of colors. They're not as like rich as I would want from gouache, what I've seen online of other artists using. Maybe you're supposed to use it much less saturated with water as I do, but I'm just not the biggest fan of these. I don't really see the justification in their price. $20 to $30 I would not spend on this. So I wanted to upgrade my gouache, and I really do love this set. This is, I don't know how to say this, from a Swiss brand. Caran is how I say it. I don't know if that's right or not. And these are pan gouache. So looking at it, it looks like, you know, elementary school, primary school, like finger paints, but these are great quality. This set is about $35 to $40, and these are beautifully pigmented gouache. So just picking up, I feel like not even that much on my brush. I get a nice, beautiful saturation of color. I feel like much more saturation than even straight from the tube on the Windsor and Newton. Maybe I'm using the Windsor and Newton wrong. You know, let me know if you are more familiar with using gouache. I'm actually brand new to using gouache, but I do really like it for adding highlights and adding detail to some of my watercolor work. I do love using the white gouache for snow effects, for highlights, things like that. So this set does come with a tube of white gouache. I do sometimes use it dried from the palette over here, and I do also use it sometimes straight from the tube. And I don't use it for mixing, but I do use it for highlights over watercolor. So just to show you on our previous kind of swatch sheet here, if I take some of this white straight from the tube, I can use that to then paint some sort of highlight or effect right over my watercolor. As we know, with watercolor, your white is the paper, but sometimes you want to add highlight or something afterwards. You want to add shadow or like sunlight on waves on the beach or something, and you want to have that freedom, like acrylics or oil paint, to use white. And if you are not afraid to break the watercolor rules, I do highly recommend this Caran gouache in white, as well as this entire palette. As I said, very highly pigmented, highly saturated colors from there. So there are some looks at the everyday watercolor paints that I use. And some different price points. And just to kind of go back over our regular watercolors after they've dried, we can see that we still get some cool effects here with the cheap watercolor paints from Loft. This was the Derwent, and they are very highly pigmented, but they do granulate a little bit. And then I love these smooth transitions we can get even on this not super thick paper with that Windsor & Newton Cotman and with the Daniel Smith watercolor. And surprisingly, watercolor pencils are also very nice to use. I became a big fan of watercolor pencils. These were our cheap ones from Loft, our mid-tier from Milan, and our higher tier from Faber-Castell. And then gouaches, again, as I said, this was our Windsor & Newton. Not a huge fan, but do really like this Caran gouache from that pad that we used. So I hope this was helpful looking at some different types of watercolor, different price ranges. Thanks for watching.